The numbers are 3-2 out.
All right, I'd like to call to order the regular meeting of the Board of Directors of Joshua Basin Water District for Wednesday, January 17th, 2018. Please rise and join Thomas in the Pledge of Allegiance. You.
Mr. Falls.
Ready? Begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
You know how many times I said that as a high school teacher?
That's why we call it.
Experience.
Become a senior idol.
Okay, do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
I'll make a motion to approve these.
It's moved and seconded. All in favor? Aye. Anyone opposed? It's unanimous. Yes, sir?
That's great. Let's go back to number 3.
I'm sorry?
Go to number 3.
Oh,
Oh, determination of quorum.
Madam President, all 5 directors are here. You have a quorum.
Thank you.
Now we got that cleared up.
Could I have done that without you? Probably not. We'll move on to item number 5, public comment. This is the time set aside for public comment on any district-related matter not appearing on the agenda. Government code prohibits the board from taking action on these items, but they may be referred for future consideration. Please state your name and limit your comments to 3 minutes, and just go to the microphone. Yeah.
Good evening. My name is Gail Austin, and I would like to urge the board members to commit political suicide and approve the rate hike for the greater good of our community. I know that this board didn't cause the issues that now require a steep rate hike, but this board does have the opportunity to approve the hike and address the issues that would be an excellent example to future boards of how to successfully manage our water district. I ask you to commit political suicide because I realize that all of you have been elected, and the voters that oppose the rate hike might decide to vote for someone else who opposes rate hikes instead of re-electing the current board. I ask you not to placate said voters by suppressing water rates. I urge you to raise our rates so Joshua Basin Water District can buy water to replace what we've drained from the aquifers, and to ensure that our homes and businesses receive uninterrupted delivery of high-quality water. Thank you.
Thank you, Gail. Anyone else? Ed?
Ed Valorant. A couple things. I've dealt with LAFCO before. Your mailer said that it had to be by partial owners only. Are you the lawyer that's...
Yes, I am, sir.
I believe that also, if you got 50% of the registered voters that protested, that is sufficient to stop it as well. That was the guidelines that I had gotten from LAFCO on another issue. I believe that is the case. I also do not agree with this lady because one of the assumptions on the study was it was going to cost $2.5 million to replace your system. 29 Palms has got it on their schedule. You've got 4,555 customers and 852, that's the numbers I got from you, inactive people. 29 Palms got 8,000, and they're looking to go to a electronic system with a meter and a sending unit and towers where you don't have to drive around, that will relay the stuff to the center for $1.2 million. That's a delta, you're 3/4 of that, that's $900,000 if you bought what they bought, not $2.5 million. I think that there is serious problems with this rate study. Also, I handed out some stuff in the past comparing the stuff that I got from public pay .california.government. Your organization, even though it's less, as a third smaller, your staff cost is $500,000 more than them. I think that is outrageous. I think that the salaries and the positions should be looked at. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else? Seeing none, we will go on to the, oh, we've got one more. Yes, sir.
My name's John Stang. Am I coming across okay? I'm just here this evening to oppose this $60,000 that you budget every year for the USGS. I can't see where the information you get from them is that beneficial. I would think that for every 5 years, you want to track the flow of water, see how it's changed, fine. Every year, it's a waste of money.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else? Seeing none, we will move on to the consent calendar. Matters on the consent calendar are considered routine in nature and will be enacted in single motion without discussion. Any board member or member of the public may request that an item be removed from the consent calendar and acted on separately. The two items are the draft minutes of the December 20th, 2017 regular meeting of the board and the December 17th check register, which was reviewed by the Finance Committee on January 10th. Do I have a motion?
I move that we accept the consent calendar.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? It's unanimous, and the consent calendar has been approved. We will move to item number 7, 1214, rehabilitation. And Mr. Sauer, I think that's your report.
Thank you. So our recommendation is the board authorize the general manager to take such actions as needed to further treat well 14 at a cost not to exceed $225,000 with a 10% contingency of $15,000. That was the number that we had estimated before we opened the bids today, and so that number will be revised down. But as you know, well 14 has been offline for 2 years following 2 contractors' unsuccessful efforts to rehab and clean out the well. We all consider well 14 a high priority well because it produces up to 60% of our annual production, and we need to move forward and treat this well and get it back online. We've developed a plan for the next steps with staff, Water System Engineering out of Kansas City, and Dudek Engineering. We requested 4 companies bid on the on the request for bids. They all have a known capability to meet the additional pumping standards down to 740 feet below ground surface. The bids that we opened today, we received 2 bids. One was for $241,000, and the other was for $160,000. And we have selected the lower bidder, contingent upon the board approving the bid. Now, I want to go into a little bit of detail, and Mike Metz is here if you have additional questions from Dudek Engineering. So the way we bid this is there's a minimum amount of activity that they need to do, which we believe will result in the well being properly treated. However, if, for example, they need more than 9 days to pump or more than 4 days to surge and swab, then there are at the bottom of the bidding process, there are 3 additive items. So if they do not, if the successful bidder does not have to do any of the additive items, his minimum bid for the first 11 requirements is $102,804. If they have to do additional work and had to do all of the additive, that would be an additional $57,000. So we are hopeful that it will be less than $160,000, but if the additive work is required, they've already identified what their cost would be per day to do the various activities. So I could ask for the board to approve $160,000. But I want to be clear with the board that that's just for the company to do the work. We also have to have project management. And if we have DUDEC do the project management, it's going to be 5 to 6% above that bid, or $178,000 if the company has to do all of their attitude. If we do the project management, it's not additional cost. However, the work that our staff would usually be doing would be delayed while the project management work is going on. And DUDEC Engineering is the contract manager, so we would be working with them anyway. So it's going to be total cost to get this well worked on, somewhere in the vicinity of $180,000. But the bid itself for the company doing the work could be as high as $160,000 with a 10% contingency, or it could be as low as $102,800. And that's just dependent on how the well responds to the new protocols. So with that, I would like to suggest to the board that you authorize the general manager to enter into this contract for approximately $160,000 with a 10% contingency. And that's all you need to do, but I want the board to be aware that there's project management costs that go along with each project, and we'll talk about that some more in the next agenda item as well.
Thank you. Any comment from the board?
Not yet.
Seeing none, is there?
I have one. So Kurt, this is actually treating the well again, or is it putting a new shaft in there, or what are they actually doing?
It's downhole video. It's mobilization, demobilization, excavation of any oil that may be on the top of the well at the aquifer, evacuation of the well sump at the very bottom of the well at 740 feet depth, pre and post cleaning video, well cleaning, actually going in and cleaning the column, chemical treatment and disinfection, and well equipment reinstallation and startup. So that's the actual work. There's cleaning. Well, first of all, there's bailing out pumping out the bottom of the sump, which we believe is fairly well pumped out, but we believe there's about 2 feet remaining. Then there's cleaning and pumping that detritus out, and then disinfection. And then once it's disinfected, we'll put the column and the pump back in the hole and do our 5 days of step testing to make sure that the well meets state water quality standards.
So when we cleaned this thing the last time, we didn't put on the wire brushes or something, if I recall. We just, they went down and scrubbed this thing without the, is that right, Mike? Well,
Go ahead.
I believe that they did it the last time using wire brush as well.
oh, okay.
So the process was very similar to what we're going to do again, to go throughout the whole well, start with the agitation and the swabbing and the surging of the well, move on to chemical addition, and then pumping. The big difference here is the pumping is going to be much greater. Before they were using airlift pumps to get the information, the detritus and stuff out of the well. We have required them to get a pump that will do more than 500 gallons a minute. So they're going to use a submersible pump to put down there, and we're going to pump it really hard to get all that stuff out this time. Try to move that stuff out. That's the big difference.
And we'll pump it in 10 or 20 foot increments with discs, sealing off those 10 or 20 foot increments so that we suck the water out of the formation and the detritus or other materials that may be there.
Okay. Just a moment, we'll go back and have public comment. Is there anything else from the board? Okay.
I just have one
No,
question.
please go up there so we can get you on tape.
Just one technical question. Where you're pumping it out in 20-foot increments, are you doing sampling on what's coming out in these different stratas to see? Okay, thank you very much.
Al Marquez, Sun Fair Community of Joshua Tree. First off, I would like to say that people consider me very abrasive, and I've been called other names and stuff like that because of the different comments that I've made about what's going on with the water district. But this well 14 has been out of service almost 2 years now. And as the staff has said at the last meeting, $550,000 has already been spent on this well 14. And then another $165,000, $185,000 to do some more planning with it or whatever. And having Dudek Engineering work on this, just like they did with well 17, and they had biological problems over there in well 17 for the longest time, and that cost a lot of money. Same thing with well 16 before they put it on service. Are we going to spend another $800,000, $900,000 for well number 10? Because that's going to have to be refurbished in the near future also. And that takes a lot of money out from replacing pipes in the ground. And then with these increases that the district board is planning starting in March, that's a lot of waste of money. Thank you.
Thank you, Al. Anyone else? Seeing none, you need a motion to authorize?
Yes,
Do I have a motion?
I'll make one. I recommend that the board authorize the general manager to take such actions as needed to further treat well 14 at a cost of approximately, now we're down in the 160s, with a 10% contingency fee of $15,000 or so.
Okay, do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Do a roll call vote, the start of that, your end, Parker?
Aye.
Dr. Dustin?
Aye.
Aye.
And I'm an aye. It's unanimous. So you have authority to go ahead.
Thank you.
I'd like to get that back online. I agree with Mr. Marquez, it's time. Not that we haven't been trying our darndest. Okay, we'll move on to item number 8. Presentation by Mike Metz, Dudek Engineering and various projects in the planning process. Mr. Metz, welcome back.
So, I'll kick it off. So, this is an informational discussion. We hope that you ask questions. There is a good likelihood that our capital improvement plan can now be implemented in the near future. And we have started working on planning, scheduling, engineering projects that are high priority projects. It's dawning on me that it's easy to say that we're going to replace 2 booster pumps at G Booster Station. But what does that actually mean? Where do we go with a project that was installed in the 60s with a vault with 2 steel lids that cover the vault that weigh 250 pounds each and have to be opened with a bucket on a front end loader so that we don't risk back injuries. The Tilford Way mainline replacement is in the CIP, but it's only been engineered to the level 3. So I've asked Mike, since he was up here for the bid opening today, and we were discussing well 14 as an agenda item, if he and I might speak, and mostly it's going to be Mike speaking, but I just want you to get a concept of the various projects that we're talking about and what's involved in bringing them to fruition. And the first one is tank rehabilitation. We've been diving the tanks for the past 3 years. This is the 3rd year, I believe. And they're in decent shape, and the findings from the video and the inspection say that you need to start working on them sometime in the next 5 years. We intend to start working on them next year. And the D21 reservoir and the D31 reservoir are items that we are considering implementing next year. So I'm going to defer to Mike. I've asked Mike to give us an opinion on what this might cost, and I want him to talk about what goes into that engineering opinion. I'm not sure it's technically an engineering opinion, but the process where our engineering firm comes up with the likely cost that people are going to bid it, and you're going to use an example of the well today, or the well bid today, because we need to be ready to put into our budget, which we start working on in March, the 18, 19, 19, 20 budget, those projects that we think we're going to do, so we need to know what those costs are, so we can put them in the budget, that you can approve them, and then we can move forward with the project. So let's just start with tank rehabilitation and what you're going to go through with that.
Okay. First of all, just to set the stage, if you remember back when we did the CIP, we had a pretty good discussion about how we went about getting the costs and what we were intending to do with those. And I believe it's written up in the front part of the master plan, the CIP, so if I miss something, let me know. But as far as tanks go, our intent there is our intent every time in putting together a CIP project is when we talk about the class of cost estimate that we did, the class 3 that he's talking about versus the class, there's 5 classes, basically. It starts at 1 and goes to 5, and these are set by some cost estimating society out there that does this stuff. But when we're at the level of a preliminary design level or a budgeting level, that's where these classes of 3 and 4 come in. What our goal is to give you a number that encapsulates all of the costs that you're likely to see. So we'll go look at that project. For instance, with the CIP, we went out and we looked at we went with district staff, we went out and looked at every piece of equipment. We didn't look at the pipelines underneath, but the facilities, the pump stations and the reservoirs. And our goal is to look at those and determine what really needs to be done. As we said, we dive those, we do what we need to do. And from that, we look at what needs to be done from what we can see, and then we add on to that design, engineering design costs. We add on to that the administrative costs that the district has. If there's any environmental aspects to a project, we'll add those in. Then we estimate from engineering experience and from their various different ways we come up with the construction cost of that particular tank rehabilitation in this case. And then we'll look at construction management and inspection, because you have to make sure the contractor's doing what he's supposed to do. And then all of that comes together into a number. And that number is a preliminary number that you can put into your budget so that it's conservative. The intent is for that to be conservative, not overly conservative. You want to be conservative so that when you get the actual cost, it's less than what you do. And the reason that is because we want you to have the money planned for, but we don't want it to be so much that the ratepayers are paying too much. And that's the goal of what we're trying to do. So if we use, and that's on every project, but if we use, for instance, as we talked about well 14 today, we did all that estimation and came up with $225,000. Now, in this case, we only had 2 bidders, but if you have a lot of bidders, what our goal is to do is to be the 2nd or 3rd low bidder. That's what our estimate would. We'd like it to be there. If we can get right down on it, that's fine too. We don't want to be 10% low, because now you've budgeted money that is not enough to do the project. And so that's going to end up being a budget transition, moving some money in the budget, or it's going to be a change order, or it's going to be something that's going to cause you trouble within your budgeting process. So we don't want to be there. We want to be, like I said, in that 2nd or 3rd slot. We don't want to be the highest guy either, because we overestimated it at that point. So in the case of well 14, as we talked about, we were at 125. We got 2 bids. One was a little bit over it at 240. The other one was a little bit under it at 160. And as we've talked about, those numbers are actually incorporating things that we hope we don't have to do, so it could even be lower. But the goal is to make sure that we cover those costs and do that. So with the tanks that we're talking about now with D2-1 and D3-1, we actually have done the specifications. In this case, there aren't any drawings. But what we do have is a videotape of the inside of the tank. So we look at that, and you know, I can just give you an idea of what happens when you look at these tapes. The guy's swimming around in the water, he's showing you all this stuff, and it looks just fine until he touches it, and then something falls off, you know, or there's dirt or something like that. We had one in another agency, we reviewed the tape, we looked at everything looked fine. When they drained the tank, everything looked fine. They started sandblasting off the coating, and the overflow fell off. So what happens is the coating is covering up things that we can't see. And so when we go to estimate a project like a tank rehabilitation, we have to look at what we can see, knowing that we can't see something, especially when you're talking about up around the roof and the rafters. The rafters are coated with usually an epoxy coating, and what the first thing they do is they go in and they sandblast that off because they're going to replace that. And when they do that, all of a sudden, something that looked like it was perfectly fine now has missing metal. And we look at that and we go, oh, we really need to replace that one. But on the other side, we might have said, we want to replace this one, we sandblast it, it looks fine, leave that one alone. What we typically do is tell the contractor when they put their scaffolding up to sandblast all that, to leave it up, and we actually climb up there and look at it, and we say, do this one and don't do that one, and do this one and don't do that one. So what we try to do in the process of estimating what needs to be done, we'll look at all those rafters and we'll say, okay, we might say we're going to do half of them. If we think if they think they look pretty good, we might say we're going to do half. And the reason we say that is because we get a unit price for doing that those rafters. And from that contractor, if he does less, we don't pay him for those. If he does more, we have a unit price that we can then add on, and it's not a big change order for the district. So those are the kind of things we think about as we go through this. And so on the tank, we write a spec, we don't do drawings. We give them the drawings of the existing tank, and then we tell them what we want them to do, and then we get a cost back for them. And then we have to leave some leeway in there for some of these things that will be a little more corroded than we think or a little less corroded than we think. Any questions about that, the tanks?
Anything from the board? Anything from the public?
What's the CIP?
I'm sorry, capital improvement projects. Capital improvement plan?
We're up to here with acronyms.
Okay, I apologize, yes.
Hey, Valor, and again, just a quick question. I've dealt with subcontractors before, and when you have a disparity of 50% between one and the other, does the low bidder that is that much below, have you gone through to see that they fully understand that, and they're capable of doing it?
Yeah, I can explain.
Okay, thank you very much.
It's actually a pretty astute comment, because we, when you get something that's that far apart, especially when you only have two bidders, you do look at it very closely. I spent most of the day today looking at this because I want to make sure they know how to do it. It just so happens that our company's worked with Lynch, who's the contractor that got the low bid on the project today. We've worked with them before, and we know what their capabilities are. But I did go through and check their contractor license. I looked at the projects that they've done. So we get a lot of information and require them to put that into bid so that we can verify that they have the ability and the capability to do the project. But yes, when we saw the difference in them, we were concerned, so we did extra effort in looking at that. And as we move forward, we will continue to look at what they're doing. One of the first things we're going to look at is what pump they're providing to do that evacuation of the well, and we're going to make sure that has to do it. Now, we talked about this today. If that pump they're proposing doesn't do it, we'll make them get one that does, and they have to do that at the same price that they bid. So
Thank you very
that's
much.
the way it works.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
So the next sample example is the Tilford Way main line replacement. It's Class C, 2.1 million, and the next step is to get that estimate a little more refined. That estimate is if you do it through contracting and work with a contractor, And it would potentially be a different estimate if we do it in-house. But then you're going to have the personnel and the equipment to do it in-house. So the next step for Tilford Way, if we're going to do this next year, we need to start now with the engineering review. I don't know if you have a
Right,
comment on any of that.
it's a similar type thing, and this particular one, this does have the twist, I would say, of, well, are we gonna send it out to bid for public contractors, or are we gonna do it in-house? And that makes a difference to us from the engineering standpoint of how much time we're gonna have to spend doing that. You can imagine, if you're gonna send something out to public bid, and there's gonna be a lot of people bidding on it, we have to make sure we're being equal to everyone. We have to make sure that they have all the information that they need to do a proper bid on that. We have to make sure that everybody gets the same information. So if somebody asks a question, we send it out as an addendum so that everybody heard that question and everybody got the answer to that. There's a lot of time that's involved in maintaining that public bidding process. If it's going to be done in-house, that's completely different, because now we have to just do something that's just good enough for the staff, or the operations staff, to go out and build what they need to build. Some of the most important things in a pipeline project are you going to hit something that's under the ground already, obviously. And in some cases, that's a problem. In this particular case, I don't believe that's as big an issue. So it lends itself toward that. But again, we're doing the same thing. We're looking at the project. We've gone through that to set the preliminary costs for budgeting purposes. Now we have to decide how we're going to construct the project, and then we will put together the appropriate document, whether it be just some plans that will allow in-house staff to do it, or a full public bidding process that would go out to the public. So that's the thing we have to do, but in the end, we're still going to do the same thing. Here's the process, here's the preliminary number, we want that to come in under that number slightly.
Yeah, so this particular project, I spent a little bit of time looking on, and I mentioned it at the last CAC meeting. I don't remember the exact numbers, but there's something like 40 air vacs that were not installed. There's something like 50 hydrants that were not installed when the project went in. And, that could be because there weren't houses along a long stretch of main line, so why put a hydrant in back in the 60s, 70s? Because the development just wasn't there. If the development still is not there, what's in the initial design is putting a hydrant every 660 or 330 feet, because that's the standard. But if there are no houses there, then maybe we make the decision that we don't put the hydrant in at this time, and that development pays its way and puts a hydrant in when they happen to develop that stretch. The air vacs, it's just an example of putting a main line in and trying to do it as expeditiously as you can. That may be one of the reasons that this particular area has the number of leaks that it has, or there's like 8,900 feet of 4-inch and 6-inch line, which is no longer a sufficient diameter to meet the gallon per minute flow rate established for the county or state fire flow? County fire flow. And so there's just a whole bunch of further analysis to get it right if we're going to contract it, and get it pretty right if we're going to go do it internally.
Is Tilford Way?
Out over there.
Copper Mountain
Oh,
area.
okay, thank you.
And I would just add to what the general manager said, that on those air vacs, that's not the place to skim. Because there's two things that can happen. One is, as we talked about, is the pipe can get air. When air vacs, what they do is they let air out of the pipe. And that air gets out, it gets in there from just off-gassing from the water and from various different other people opening things, and it gets in there. If you don't let it out, it creates a bubble that sits at the high spot and allows that to possibly corrode. But it also does a completely different thing, which is you've heard of air binding a tube or a pipe or something like that, or your carburetor gets airbound, you can get that. What happens is that bubble gets caught in the high spot. The water can't go through the air. It has to go through underneath the air. So what you've done is you've basically taken your, in this case, 4 and 6 inches lines and make them 3s and 2s and whatnot, because the water is trapped in there and it causes a squeeze down of that where the water can go through. What it did then is it just increased the amount of head loss that it takes to get through that pipe. So your 4s and 6s that didn't have enough fire flow to start with now have even less because the air is blocking the pipe. So that's why you need airbags. It's very important.
Thank you. Any comment? Yes, Ed.
I'm just trying to educate myself, and I'm happy with the responses that I've gotten so far. There is one other potential that where you're doing the engineering, what we have found before is a cost-effective way of doing things is having our own staff do something and having temporary workers working under their auspices where you don't have to expand your staff, and once the job is done, they're gone. You have no CalPERS liability of having a larger staff. Is it possible to look at that third scenario too, to see if it might be a more cost-effective approach? It's just a thought. Thank you.
Thank you.
I would say that I have heard that before in certain instances. I've heard of people using actually the penitentiary people. I guess, I mean, it's been done that way. I think, and it depends on what the project is. If it's a fairly small project like a cleanup project or it's something like that, you can use those type of, what you really want to do though is make sure that you have a capable person who's got experience in doing what you've been doing. So, I mean, you can certainly look at it, and if you can find those people that have that experience and that capability, then it's an option. If you don't, then you wouldn't want to have somebody working on putting pipes in the ground that really never did that before. So,
You said you were looking at doing it in-house, so I assume you
Yes.
have that capability now.
Thank you.
Okay, and one more?
Yes, sir.
So let's talk about the water flow modeling. This is one of my favorites. So the board has already approved, it's already in this year's budget to update our 2007 water flow model, which doesn't even include all of the existing pipes that are in the ground. So I just wanted Mike to speak to what an updated water flow model can give us when future development comes in and its effects on the way we manage the system.
all right. Okay, so the first thing I want to point out is that the model that you have had for several years was put together when you did your last master plan, which I believe was in '98. And
98?
98 was the last master plan. Now, before everybody goes, wow, we hadn't had a lot of growth in the community, in any community in Southern California in a lot of years, so master planning was not something that a lot of people did. Now that growth is starting to occur again, though, it is something that people are starting to look at again. Also, if your community has no way to grow, City of Carlsbad, for instance, over on the coast, they don't do master planning anymore. They do asset assessment and replacement. That's all they do, because they don't have any place to grow into anymore. So those are the kind of things. But the water model is important to a water agency in a lot of different ways. And I wrote some of them down here, so I'm just going to go through them and try to get through them quickly. Obviously, you can evaluate the effect of changing demand. Now, that's either by growth or it's by conservation or it's whatever that would result in demand changes on the community. So if you had a big development came in a certain area, now water's flowing through the system to meet that demand in a different way. And the pipe's either small enough, big enough, small enough, you've got pump stations, reservoirs, you've got wells, you've got everything trying to meet those demands. So the model actually that you see in the computer, how that all works. And it's I just give you, for water modeling, I happen to be, I went to the University of Kentucky all of the water models are based on what was the Kentucky pipe flow model. And I actually worked under the guy that wrote it, and so it's amazing how accurate that particular, now sewer modeling's not that accurate, but this modeling can be accurate. But it's only as accurate as the amount of information that you put into it. So you really need to know what your existing system is, and you put that in there, and it can be very accurate. So it's garbage in, garbage out, put good stuff in, you get good stuff out, so that's what it is. It's also you can predict your pressures, you can identify system bottlenecks. One of the things that we're always getting asked about from people that are putting in a single home or a development is, what's my fire flow capability from the system at that point? And what usually has to happen, we have to take people off the crews, what they're doing, go out and actually do a fire flow test on a hydrant. And that takes time, it wastes water, and it does a lot of other things. If we had the model, and if we do have the model running, we can actually run fire flow analysis on the model. What it does is it actually it looks at every node in the model, or every point in the model, and it tells you what the fire flow is from that based on the criteria that you give it. And then you can just look at that data and give them the answer. You don't have to go out and waste water and do all that time, take people off. You certainly can evaluate the effectiveness of various system improvements. When you put an improvement into the system, you can actually put it in the model and before you do it and say, is it going to solve the problem that we have? That's a huge capability that you don't have otherwise. You can do calculations and you can come up with what you think is going to happen, but if you can actually put it in a computer model and see it, you can have a lot more confidence in that. Just going down this list, I don't want to get them all here. It's the fact you can determine more effectively how you're using the system. You can minimize the cost of imposed improvements. So proposed improvements, you can come out and you say, okay, we have this problem, we need to do this. Well, you can put that in the model and actually fine tune that down to where you're only doing what you have to do instead of just doing a huge big project that it'll solve the problem, but we can fine tune that to save costs and save ratepayer money. So we want to do that. Obviously, you can identify the impact of new development. Now, this is a huge one, and people don't really see it this way. If you have a water system, it's kind of like the water goes from the well all the way out through the system, and it goes through all the pipes in the system. If you go out and build a new development out there, it's going to affect the area that's in. There's no doubt. But it could affect something that's across town. And I actually did this in Scottsdale. The Mayo Clinic came in and put their, in North Scottsdale, off across, way out there. And it ended up causing problems way down in the downtown area. And we were able to tell those developers, you need to fix that. Because it's a direct result of what your developer's doing. Again, the developer's paying for what they're causing as opposed to the ratepayers paying for it on their behalf. So that's a very important capability of the model. Obviously, fire flow and transient flows, you can do that. Transient flows are surges. So if you've got a pump station and it's running and all of a sudden the power goes off, you get a higher pressure as a result of that water stopping, moving, and turning around and coming back at you. So these are called transient flows, and you can do calculations on those so you can protect your system as well. One of the things we use a lot is age of water. When water comes into your system, it then travels through your system, goes into your storage tanks, and then it eventually comes out of the storage tank and goes in the house. How long does it take to do that? Because the longer it stays in the system, the more the chlorine residual is going down, the more the likelihood of the water getting bad. So you want it to be moving through the system, turning over in the reservoirs and getting out so that it's still safe water. The models are GIS integrated, so you have a GIS. This model takes advantage of your GIS. Yes, sir.
GIS?
Geographic Information Systems. Thank you. Thank you. Engineers, we're having problems with that. Engineers have a little problem with that, so I apologize. The Geographic Information System, GIS, this is a tool that you have at the district already, and it integrates, this model integrates into that and makes those two work together. So when the GIS is updated, the model can be updated and those type of things. Obviously, planning for future growth and those type of things, we talked about that. System operational changes. Now, this is something that's it's an advantage of having this tool. If you have a system, I think the easiest way is use another district. I was, again, working in Scottsdale. They had two pressure zones that were right next to each other, and they pumped water from one to the other, and that's how they maintained water pressure. And I was doing the model, actually doing the master plan, and I noticed that these two zones were connected at the other end. So really, they're one zone. And I told them, I said, well, if you turn off these pump stations and you open up these valves, this thing will operate as one zone, and you'll quit having to pump water. It'll save you a lot of money. And they did it, and it worked. And somebody complained because they got a little dirty water where they opened up one of the valves that I told them to open, so they put it all back because they didn't want to get in trouble for dirty water. But the net result is that's a perfect example where you're using a model to look at a system and say, operationally, you can change this and save yourself money, and you'll have a better system at a lower cost. Basically, using it, you can use it to improve your system reliability and efficiency, as you heard, evaluate existing performance of the system. So, you may think you're doing really good with your pumping and everything, but you might be able to change it slightly and save some money. But that's really what it's after, to prioritize your system improvements and save money. That's really what it's after. Any questions?
Thank you. Any questions from the board? That's good. Yes, Tom?
I'll take some time. So you will be our project manager, your DUDEC company, agency, whatever, will be our project manager when we start doing this kind of stuff out there?
For the modeling?
No, for any of
For all of
these
these?
pipes and tanks and
Well, that'll be a
pressure.
decision that, as the general manager said, that'll be a decision on the
Okay.
board and the staff's part as to whether they want to use inside staff or use us.
So whether we go to an outside group to come in and do our piping and all that, or if we do it internally, either way, we still have the same person that we select as a project manager? He does either one?
It could be someone on staff that is the project manager. So, for example, this is a small scale thing, but the reservoir diving that we've just completed, 4 tanks, Randy Little was the project manager.
Okay.
We issued the contract, or I think it was a purchase order. He met with them, made sure that they were doing what they're supposed to do. When we did the ED booster station, the E and D booster stations up at the C1 tank, before I got here, DUDEC was the project manager, and I forget when we did the main line, or the water recharge pipeline from the turnout down along the highway over to the recharge ponds and constructed the recharge ponds, DUDEC was the project manager. So our staff, was aware of what was going on, but they weren't out there daily working with the contractors.
Yeah, I'm
That
just,
answer your question?
I'm just concerned about turning somebody loose on our pipeline projects, for example, and then walking away, and they do whatever they do in the ground, cover it up, and we don't verify what is done with the proper materials and stuff like that. So in other words, I have a preference for a project manager that is not drawn off to clamp a leak someplace across town or something like that. Because once this stuff is in the ground and we turn the water on, and there's a boo-boo or something that's out of compliance, air breathers or some such thing, assuming they were in the plan in the first place, it's a disaster to try and repair or replace something that we've already budgeted and completed. And also, I was wondering if a project manager is a guy that, or lady, that is the one that takes that capital improvement plan and stacks the projects in a strategic sort of way, or does he have to adhere to what is on that page right now? Because my thinking is that if we go internal with doing this kind of stuff, this capital improvement plan goes out over 20 years? 30 years, and we could hire a kid to start out on this, assuming he's qualified, and he could retire doing the same thing if we have him, if we keep him busy. And an internal person, this is a nonprofit business, this organization, this water company, and that affects our costs and our pricing. Pricing might be a better word. Whereas if we have an external person come in here to do these kind of things, he's got a stock price that he has to keep up potentially, and he's got a profit that he has to make for his investors. So all of this kind of stuff has to be looked at. But just as a director, you know, I'd like to see this, if things are done internally, that we have to have 20 years, 30 years worth of tractor. And how is that going to go out over time compared to having a company come in that brings their own tractors with them or leases them or whatever they do. A side note, the capital improvement plan is on the website. A little bit harder to read than some things because the pages are this wide, so you have to sort of move your screen across to see a lot of these things. It's quite detailed and quite good. By the way, I like the capital improvement plan. I have to read more of it.
Thank you. Anyone else on the board? Seeing none, anyone from, yes, sir. Please go up to the,
Comment regarding the fire department?
comment on basically what Mike said, or if you want to comment on what Tom said. But please go to the microphone.
I'm hard to hear, I'm sorry.
I said, please go to the microphone so that we can get you on tape. And just for everyone's information, that mic does not amplify. It's for Bob to use when he's taping the meeting.
I just want to make a comment regarding the fire department's regulations. I ran into that back in 2003, and it's nothing new. I have a 6-inch main at the top side of my property, a 12-inch main on the bottom side of my property. Why that 6-inch main didn't meet their requirements is beyond me, because it comes right off of a 12-inch main and is 660 feet away. I think there's other ways to address the fire department's need, and in that particular case, I would have been required to put in sprinklers. Where you have galvanized pipes in your system and people don't have the flow, I would suggest that the county board of supervisors or the fire department take the position that when a house sells, then it's upgraded to irrigation system, sprinkler system within the house, rather than this board trying to upgrade pipelines to meet their regulation. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else? Back to you, Mr. Metz.
I just wanted to respond to a couple of the comments that were made there that, I totally agree with you. The reason that we provide a service for construction management and inspection, which is the project manager position, is because it is a cost, it is a cost that is intermittent to most agencies. And so therefore, if you have the work, as you said it yourself, if you can keep them busy, yeah, it's much better to have your own in-house person. But if it's an intermittent thing where they're busy and then they're not busy, and that's when consultants are used, and so I would agree 100% with you, is if you can keep them busy, that's the way to go. Certainly, the other thing I wanted to let you know is in terms of putting together the, interesting, in terms of putting together the plans and specifications, that if it's going to go out to bid as opposed to be done by in-house staff, We work very closely with the operations staff to review those and to make sure we're incorporating everything that they want or need in the field before we go out with those, so that it's not a situation where we as the CM or inspector goes out there and just does whatever we want to do. It's what, we're there to do what needs to be done on the basis of operations and those type of things. So I just wanted to make sure that you saw, that you understood that goes through a long review process with staff to make sure everything's incorporated, and then even when it's out there, if there's a submittal or if there's a request for information that comes in from the contractor, we'll bring that in and go back to sit with staff and talk about what they want to be there, what they need to be there, and get that done the right way. So it's a very cooperative situation with staff, even though they're not out there every day. So I just want to make sure that is understood.
Thank you.
Do you have anything else? Mike, thank you very, very much. It's nice to have you here. We appreciate it.
Thanks,
And
Mike.
the capital improvement plan was such a boon for this district. The number of years that I was here without it is just unbelievable that we managed to go that far, that long, without having this kind of a plan. It's very necessary. So I'm sure you want to take off. Thank you very much.
Take off, unless you need.
No, sir. Thank you. We'll
Thanks.
talk.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we will move to item number 9, recruitment of the Director of Water Resources and Operations position. Mr. Sauer.
Okay, so my recommendation to the board is that you authorize the general manager to revise the Director of Water Resources and Operations position as an Assistant General Manager of Operations. The district has advertised the DWRO position, the Director of Water Resources and Operations position, DWRO. We advertised it on October, November for 40 days. We received 10 applications, 3 of which made it through initial screening. We interviewed using a 5-person panel, which represented our staff from the field and our staff from the office. The unanimous recommendation from that panel to the general manager is that we re-advertise the position. I believe it's a very high priority for us to get the right person into this job and to do it expeditiously, especially with the capital improvement plan and all we have to do to plan and implement. In discussions with Mr. Doug Spears of Weston Incorporated, he's the consultant that's completing the organizational assessment. I've been informed that a high priority recommendation in the organizational assessment will be to restructure the organizational chart so that the DWRO position has the same authority as the current Assistant General Manager for Operations versus Finance. This structure aligns with industry standards, provides a more desirable recruitment pool, recognizes the complexity of implementing the capital improvement plan, and potentially provides for succession management. It's my recommendation to the board that the current DWR position be redescribed as the Assistant General Manager of Operations, and that the pay scale be commensurate with the same pay scale as the existing Assistant General Manager for Finance. At the top end of the salary table, this is a $23,000 annual increase over the current pay scale for the DWRO. Another important consideration, I think, for the district is succession planning. The current general manager will be retiring in 1 to 2.5 years. The current assistant general manager is planning to retire in 4 years, and she is not interested in assuming the general manager position. I don't know why that is. So the succession management strategy potentially moves an already informed, experienced employee at the AGM for Ops into the general manager's position when I retire. It's a smoother transition that potentially saves the district up to $50,000 in headhunter consultant fees during the search for the general manager, and it allows us to potentially, if we hire the correct person, to train them up so that there's a smooth transition. So That's my recommendation. I would like to move forward before the organizational assessment is totally completed and approved by the board, because that's going to delay us another six weeks or so. So that's the end of my report.
Thank you, sir. Any comments from the board?
How long do you think it'll take to kind of come up with a new job description or?
Fortunately, Susan was instrumental in hiring Sarah Johnson.
Yeah,
And we were just, I'll take some time. It's evaluation time for all of our employees, and Susan just shared with me Sarah's accomplishments. She's already reviewed 6 job descriptions. She has several more to review and update. And her note in document that Susan gave me was that the DWRO upgrade job description would be done top priority, and I expect to have it next week.
And then the West End's report is,
We
will be,
we will get the draft, as opposed to the final. We'll get the first draft from them on Friday.
oh, okay.
There will be discussions about that draft, and we will be prepared to bring the final recommendations to the board in the first meeting in March. That's assuming that there's no additional requests by the general manager, staff, or by the board for additional work to be done in the organizational assessment.
It's a good strategy, and I'm so pleased that you guys came up with this. And also, too, in looking at hiring, that's got to be attractive to somebody who says, well, geez, this isn't a dead-end job. They're grooming me, and there's a need here, so thank you very much.
Yeah, I concur. I think this is a great idea, and I'm happy that Doug Spears is on board with this. I guess the only part on this is that for the organizational assessment study, the results coming to the board will be in March, so we'll have a full cadre of staff, and I assume there'll be some recommendations in terms of the structure, in terms of plussing up or minusing the current structure.
Yes.
Gary?
I just wanted to say that in terms of organizational structure, this does make sense. In my involvement in public service for many years, looking at the way our organizations were structured, you really do need to have 2 people that report to the general manager, that one who is really and I know you don't like this word, Kurt, but the chief of administration, and another one that's the chief of operations. It just makes sense organizationally. I like this recommendation, and I also think it's important for us to be thinking about succession and recruiting highly qualified candidate into that position that could potentially be, not guaranteed to be, but potentially become the next general manager.
Tom?
Well, my thought is that things are going to get really busy around here, and it's busy with complex stuff. This packet that we get from Sarah, or Beverly over there, I'm sorry. It's just this is 70 pages this time, with some really neat sketches in it and stuff that I think we're going to talk about later if I don't talk too long. This is a really complex stuff, and we have to have a player fielding the ball at every position, and we have to account for the potential of people leaving the game as we proceed through this. We have to have succession here during this time when we're doing so much. This is not a time to stagger, because if we don't keep standing still with this, is going to cost us money, just like doing things costs us money. And I'd rather be doing stuff, spending money, than
trying to find somebody at exactly the wrong moment to fill one of these very tough positions. Although I should say that when we had a vacancy in the general manager's position for some months, I forgot how many, I was sitting over there watching all this happen, Susan performed the duties of the general manager quite ably. And all along, I was wondering, well, why don't we just put Susan in there?
Because she would have killed
Susan's just not excited about the idea of doing that. So I'm for this.
Thank you. Any public comment?
Thank you, Tom.
Sure.
And I certainly concur with everyone. I was dreading the idea. I would love to have someone on staff that could move into the general. I was dreading the idea of looking for another general manager. That was, we were so fortunate to find someone who lived right here and who's eminently qualified to do this. So, love to be able to have someone that could step in. So is there a motion? Is there anything from the public? I did ask that, right? Yes. Okay. Do I have a motion?
I move that the board authorize the general manager to revise the Director of Water Resources Operations position as Assistant General Manager of Operations.
Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
I'm going to take a roll call, starting with Rebecca.
Aye.
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 And I'm an aye. It is unanimous, and it is approved. Moving on to item number 10, final water storage agreement with Mojave Water Agency. Mr. Sauer.
We brought this to the board, I believe, a couple months ago. And what this does is it creates an agreement between the Mojave Water Agency and the Joshua Basin Water District, so that when they have surplus state water, they can store it in various places. They have 4 or 5 different places where they store it. Ames, Ricci, High Desert, although High Desert is currently purchasing everything that goes in this water storage. Basically, it allows the Mojave Water Agency to store water in our aquifer that can only be used by Joshua Basin Water District sometime in the future. So for example, if we were to order 500 acre-feet of water this year, and the first snow course that the state conducted showed that there was about 3% snowpack compared to the 10-year average. The current allocation is 15%. So there could be a year, such as this one, where there isn't sufficient state, and this is theoretical, where there is not sufficient water that the Mojave Water Agency has to meet our 500 acre-foot request. If they had already stored 575 acre-feet, they'd have 500 and we'd have 75 acre-feet. So they'd be able to meet our request, and the water would already be in the aquifer, and we would simply pay them that year's going rate for the water. Okay? For every 100 acre-feet that they store, the district will accrue 15% of water shrinkage, and that's ours at basically no cost, other than the cost of personnel to run the recharge system. So the board was in favor of this when I brought it to them, but there was a concern with item number 12. That was a termination by JBWD, and basically if we had, 10,000 gallons, if they had 10,000 gallons, 10,000 acre-feet of water stored in our aquifer, and we terminated the agreement, they've got an investment in that water. It costs them to get it here. And so they initially suggested that we would have to pay them for all 10,000 acre-feet immediately. Well, we cannot financially do that. So Mojave Water Agency and I have been working, and they have agreed to a suggestion that should we terminate the agreement, and I don't see why we would, but you have to plan for whatever. Should we terminate the agreement, we would be responsible for buying from them, from the water that is theirs, is stored in our aquifer, a 3-year running average. So if we'd been getting 1,000 acre feet for 3 years, the last 3 years, then we'd be required to buy from them 1,000 acre feet a year until that 10,000 acre feet had been sold to us. If for some reason it's less than that, the minimum that we would be required to pay them if we terminate is 500 acre feet, which is what we're currently doing. So rather than shipping us 500 acre feet that year down the pipeline, it's already in the ground. And I see it as advantageous to the aquifer that they are pre-storing water for us to buy, and the rate of drawdown on our aquifer should decline even further. So with that change, and it's already been approved by their, forget the technical name, but their operations committee, and they're taking the same document to their board next week for approval, and I hope to be able to report to them this week that the board has approved this water storage agreement.
Thank you. Any questions from the board?
No, sounds good. Possession's 9/10 of the law.
Any
I
questions?
I have a comment.
Okay, and then Ed, as soon as he comments.
Well, I just wanted to say that I'm very much in favor of this water storage agreement. We've had drought 5 out of the last 6 years, and now we're looking at maybe 6 out of the last 7 years. And I think there could come a point in time where there is not adequate water available to meet our recharge needs for 1 or more years. And so the idea of banking this water away is a great one. I mean, I would, make the analogy somewhat to, all of us hopefully setting aside water for emergencies, for times when water is not available. And I think that these are very favorable terms. We actually get some free water as part of this deal. And if we have periods of time where water isn't available, we can purchase what's in the ground already that's been stored away for us. So that's all.
And actually, it's more advantageous in the beginning when I first heard, when they were doing this with High Desert, it was 10%. So the 15 is actually it's a really good deal. Ed?
This might be somewhat out of ignorance, I haven't had time to really read through it, but in the unlikely case of termination, which I don't believe would ever happen because we're drawing down ours, if we had to pay them back, would we get to deduct the 15% for shrinkage? Because they have the shrinkage, because you mentioned us paying them back, like they put 10,000 in, we pay them 10,000. Wouldn't we by right have to pay them for like 8,500 because of the 15% shrinkage?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, because of the 15% shrinkage, if they put 10,000 in, they own 8,500 acre feet, we own 1,500 acre feet.
Yep.
So
Any
we
other
don't have to-
comments? Yes, sir.
We've drawn down something like 40 feet of our aquifer so far
In the last 50-plus years, we've drawn the aquifer down 50 feet.
Yeah.
The Joshua Tree aquifer, the Copper Mountain Mesa aquifer wasn't being drawn down at all until we put wells 15 and 16 in it, and now it's being drawn down at approximately 3 to 4 inches a year. So once we started recharging at 500 acre feet, it's 3 years of measuring. We believe that it's now being drawn down at about 5 to 6 inches a year. We had conservation, and we had 500 acre feet added. So at 1,000 acre feet, there should be no drawdown.
It's just
Should
my,
be.
go ahead.
Should be.
It's just my feeling that an aquifer is happier when it's wet. And I'm not 100% sure, because in particular, I think Joseph Fairbanks made a comment over at the farmer's market booth that will be opening in about March or so. He made a comment about how we may not be the kind of an aquifer where there could be a subsidence of some kind, but nonetheless, I still worry that there might be a sag of some kind if we just continue to just draw water out of that thing, even though it may be at a slower rate, because we're buying 500 acre feet of water for something like $280,000 a year or something like that. I'd just rather have that thing inflated myself.
Thank you. Public comment? Mr. Marquez?
There's been much, Al Marquez, Sunshine Community. There's been a lot of discussion in the last 15 years about overdrawn on the aquifer of Joshua Basin aquifer. I have a graph here from the USGS, which measures the water levels in our district. And I just made a point to look at well 14. Of course, this information hasn't been updated since 2010. But I did notice that between 2004 and 2006, water levels increased from approximately, let's see, from approximately 2,300 feet up to 270 some odd feet. So water levels went up in between 2004 and 2006. And it also went up between 2008 and 2010, approximately maybe 75, 80 feet level went up. So when people talk about there is no natural recharge in our basin, that's not really coming out with the correct information on there, because we do have recharge, even though it's not a natural recharge, but it is from recharge from septic tanks. And even though septic nitrates do go into the ground, but by the time it gets to the aquifer levels, it's dissipated quite a bit. So a lot of that water we do return to our aquifer, and going by USGS, it's about 1,200 feet a year. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Seeing none, we will move on to item, is there anything I need to do?
We have to,
We need to approve it, yes, we have the motion.
I move that that the board approve the water storage agreement with Mojave Water Agency.
Do I have a second?
Second.
We have 2 seconds. I think we can do this verbally. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? It's unanimous.
Well, I just wanted to thank staff for getting that agreement put together.
Yeah,
And
yes.
really appreciate it, and good negotiations.
Thank you very much.
Mojave Water Agency is a very good partner.
They are indeed.
They have been an excellent partner. Okay, this is also about Mojave Water Agency. The agreement with Mojave Water Agency for water supply connection and transfer of facilities at the recharge turnout. And I think you talked about this last time, didn't you?
Yes, we talked about this one last time. There were no concerns, but we did not approve it, and I'd like to take the approval, get approval from the board. And basically, as a reminder, if Kurt can figure out, the recharge pipeline comes down through Lucerne, comes down to the turnout on Linda Lee, and goes to the High Desert turnout and to the Joshua Basin turnout. And that's a really pretty picture that nobody can see, but I liked it. So at the recharge at approximately Linda Lee, that's our turnout. And when it was put in by Mojave Water Agency in the 94, 95, what was inside the vault was owned by Mojave Water Agency. When we decided in 2012, 13 to extend the pipeline, we put in a different system. So there's the meter, and from the meter over to the end of the vault is pipeline that we own. And that's the actual meter, it's read out over the other. So then when it goes out of the vault, this 2,000 feet of pipeline runs over to Yucca Mesa Road, and the Mojave Water Agency still owns that pipeline. It's an administrative action that was never taken when we were working on our recharge pipeline. So when we went to the Mojave Water Agency about water storage, and we're talking, their lead engineer, Darrell, said, oh, by the way, there's a housekeeping issue. We would like you to take the 2,000 feet of pipeline, which is what they do with High Desert. High Desert owns from the vault, from their meter, all the way into their recharge facility. And so this is basically fixing something that was that was agreed to in the 90s, and it just hasn't come to fruition. And at the last time we talked about it, the board was in agreement. Director Flown made the comment that basically it's pipeline on our side of the meter, and our customers are responsible for their pipeline on their side of the meter. We ought to be responsible for our pipeline on our side of the meter. So that's the end of my report.
Any director comments? Seeing none, any comments from the public? Do I have a motion?
I'll make a motion that the agreement with Mojave Water Agency for water supply connection transfer facilities at the recharge turnout, recommend that the board approve agreement with Mojave Water Agency to take ownership of the pipe.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? It is unanimous. That's that. Mr. Counsel, Mr. General
Yeah,
Counsel.
Madam Chairman, I have nothing specific other than, in addition to what's independently been covered tonight in the projects I've assisted staff on, except for one, and that's the water storage agreement. And I might share with you that another fortuitous aspect of that project is that my partner, Steve Abbott, was able to use the CEQA work that was done on your original groundwater replenishment project. It was broad enough and comprehensive enough that we didn't have to duplicate that effort in the water storage agreement. So that's another hurrah for that project.
I love it when something comes together, so that-
That's it. Look, I might also remind the board that that study that we've all been waiting for, the water rate assistance, nothing, I haven't seen anything on the website yet, even though the written report was due January 1. I called the Assemblyman's office who authored the bill. He wasn't in, and the staff person who was working on that aspect wasn't in. But that report isn't actually due to the legislature till February 1. So hopefully, when I come back here, I'll have something of substance to comment on.
At the beginning, I had,
I'm sorry, sir.
having spoken with Labco before and dealt with them, I had brought up the issue that there is two ways of protesting. One is partial owners, and the second one is voters. And I'd like that clarified because you didn't send out a form or reference the possibility of the voters, which is a much smaller set.
Yeah. I have to correct you before you go on with that. Article 13 of the Constitution, the standing for voting is partial owners,
Okay,
not voters.
I'll contact and ask someone else.
Thank you. If there's nothing else, we will go to the general manager's report.
Okay. Okay, Chromium 6 update. I mentioned before the holidays that we were working with the Division of Drinking Water, our sanitary engineers, Eric Zuniga, and Riverside's Eugene Wing, to ask them to talk to Gary Chan of the Division of Finance, who is the manager of our grant, so that we could do some stannous chloride reduction coagulation bench study. And it was their interpretation that that wasn't qualifying under our existing grant. Eric did contact Gary, and Gary and Randy Mays and I had a conversation this week, and they have agreed that it does qualify. And Randy's been working diligently to get the stannous chloride bench study into Gary with the schedule and the costs. And Gary is going to run it by his supervisor, and we will probably be able to use the grant money for this stannous chloride bench study. So that was a good deal.
Excellent.
And I believe it was last Thursday, I got a call from USDA, United States Department of Agriculture, but Tom left, so USDA, in their rural development assistance group, who we worked with, Susan informed me, we worked with the same two people, I believe, during the Copper Mountain Mesa assessment bond issue and the whole program. Well, somehow they had heard that we have a capital improvement plan and we have a rate study, and that we're moving forward with both of those. And they asked if they could come and speak with us and see if there's some way that they could help us with generating grants for the district on the capital improvement plan.
Oh, gee.
So they are coming next week, and Susan and Randy and I will be meeting with them, telling them our plans, and we may very well end up writing additional grants to USDA for some of these projects. So
Excellent.
whoever sent them the 218 mailing, I appreciate it, but I don't know who it was yet. Today, we had what I think was a very interesting solar project ad hoc committee meeting with some of the community residents, and I believe that Gary, whose idea, this idea came from Gary, and maybe he'll make some more comments during director's comments, but there were all kinds of great ideas on how we could move this project forward. The reorganization study, I already mentioned, the first draft will be this week, and we'll go through the iterations and review it and get you informed and bring it to the board and the public on the first meeting in March. Do you remember the conservation figures for December? I can't remember if I mentioned them.
Very close to us.
Yeah, so we're still cumulatively at 18%, doing very well. Director Flown asked me to mention that this has historically been the time of year when former Director Gary Wilson would bring his calendars in that he received all year. And Director Wilson is quite ill, and Tom has been speaking with him, and Tom brought Director Wilson's calendars in, and they're in the front foyer for anybody in the public that would like to take one, or as he often said, several. And we wish Mr. Wilson's family the best at these times. So let's see. On that somber note, let me go to a happier note. This week, we had an all-employee staff meeting, and there were two individuals that have 10 years of service as part of our employee recognition. They got to spin the wheel, and actually one of them was on his day, I took a day off, so he missed it, he'll get to spin the wheel. And won lunch with the general manager.
And the loser.
He also gets lunch.
And we also presented to Susan, for 30 years of service, a very nice necklace. So thank you, Susan.
A water drop. Isn't that pretty?
That's great.
Appropriate.
Goes with your license plate.
Yeah.
I love your license plate. Okay,
So I think that's it.
is that, are you done?
Did I forget?
I just don't want to cut the general manager off.
No, I
if he's still
think
speaking.
I'm done.
Okay, director's reports on meetings attended, comments, and future agenda items. I guess we've got a list of the things here, but let's go down the road because I usually skip director comments. So we'll start with Director Unger.
Yeah, I don't think I've been to a meeting since we last met, except for today's with Director Hunt called for looking at actually getting some solar power to the districts. We can actually save some money for our ratepayers. And it was really good. A lot of people were there, a lot of good ideas, and I took away what Brendan Cummings said from the Center for Biological Diversity, that there is the pragmatic, the ambitious, and the delusional. And we stayed pretty much in the pragmatic and the ambitious, so that was a very, very good meeting. That's
Thank
all
you.
I have.
No meetings attended, and look forward to the ones that are scheduled up. No report.
Thank you. Director Hunt?
Well, on a somber note as well, I intended to attend the Mojave Water Agency meeting, but unfortunately there was a terrible accident on Highway 247 with traffic closed in both directions, and I was not able to attend that meeting. And then secondly, yes, on a positive note, today's meeting was fantastic. It really, really increased my enthusiasm, which was already very high, for the possibility of the district producing renewable energy to offset its energy costs and help the state attain its goals of renewable energy goals to fight climate change. And that last one, the delusional, some people suggested that maybe that could also be considered visionary, so it just depends on how you look at it. But I think
Man's vision and another man's delusions, yes.
right, but I think that there was a lot of great input today by people that attended the meeting, and hopefully we'll hear back from the Energy Commission soon. I think we'll be reaching out to them to find out what the status of our grant application is for the scoping and feasibility study. And Kurt and I talked today about possibly making a trip out to the Eastern Municipal Water District to look at their facility and talk to their staff about their facility, and get the inside baseball on that. So.
Excellent. Director Flow?
With regard to the solar project, just thought I'd mention that in December, for the full month, just for pumping, because we have electric bills for this office and for the shop out there, but for pumping, the electric bill was $30,162.94 to pump water. So there's a relevance. It's just not a popular political thing and all that kind of stuff. It's very practical to carefully consider doing this. We had our finance committee meeting the other day, and some discussion was done, in addition to reviewing this check register, which is what we do every month or so at these Finance Committee. I'll speak up a little bit so you can hear me a little better. At the Finance Committee meetings, we do go through the check register, and we look at where these checks, this money is going, and when we have issues or questions or something like that. We usually have our accountant, Ann Roman, there, and Susan Greer, the Assistant General Manager. She's there too to explain how the money is flowing and such. Some discussion about our reserves policy, the money that we hold in reserve for lots of different reasons. It's slightly complex why we have reserves and what kind they are and what the limitations on spending them on. All that stuff is but we're forming a policy on that, and I started to get a little too far into the weeds on that, so the president of the board cut me off, and we're going to have a side meeting about this with less than a quorum, so that we're in compliance with the Ralph M. Brown Act, and we're going to go through some of our concerns. I think by now Director Johnson's been advised of that meeting, and he'll have an opportunity to go. It should be just a ball.
You know they are.
Yeah, they are. Just so I'm done. Thank you.
Actually, one of the things that was interesting about the Finance Committee and the check register is we went through, there were several checks that were written, and we clarified who they were for, because it's very difficult sometimes to know what they're all about, and it was quite interesting. I tend to not disagree with Director Johnson on them being riveting, but this was pretty interesting. And then water operations and water resources and operations was its usual wonderful self, so it was good. And for public outreach, we will ask Kathleen to give her report.
February 22nd, Thursday, and February 27th, a Tuesday, from 8 to noon, are the next two district tours. Limited seating, and they have to be RSVP'd, so if you are aware of anyone that's been burning to go, let them know. We ruled out having a unique opportunity to watch the riveting Finance Committee at work. But aside from that being taken off the itinerary, it is an excellent opportunity to learn about the ins and outs of what goes on with the Water District and a chance to ask questions directly. So please get names to me. I have a list going. The invitations are going out, and it will go out in the February newsletter. Also, we are ramping up for the March 25th Sunday afternoon Water Education Day. Looks like it's going to be just as big as last year. I'm still waiting for about 10 of the 38 potential participants to totally commit, but last year we only had 34, so it is increasing. If everyone comes back, it's still going to be many, many ways to look at water, so mark your calendars and you'll be hearing a lot more. Thank you.
Thanks, Kathleen. Moving to item number 14, future director meetings and training opportunities. ASB-CSD, the Association of San Bernardino County Special Districts dinner is in Rancho Cucamonga on Monday. I'm going to go to that because I'm hoping that Kathy Teagues, who is the outgoing president of Aqua, will be there. I don't know, because she's a director at that water district, so that's the only reason I'm going. Mojave Water Agency Board of Directors meeting on January 25th is Director Flowen. Mojave Water Agency Technical Advisory Committee on February 1st is me, and I presume that General Manager Sauer will also go, maybe not, but he sometimes does. Finance Committee.
A riveting day.
And we, as everyone knows, that is now the Wednesday between the board meetings, so February 14th. Finance is at 9, Water Resources is at 10.
It's Valentine's Day.
It's Valentine's Day.
Maybe we have some candy.
Yeah.
Oh, wouldn't that be nice? Trick or treat for that. And with that, unless there's anything else, yes, sir.
I have one thing. So, a couple meetings ago in between the Riveting Finance Committee and the Stellar Water Resources and Operations Committee, we just don't have enough time in an hour to address those. So I would like to suggest to the board that the Water Resources and Operations meeting actually start at 10:30 instead of 10 o'clock.
Yeah, we talked about that at the meeting last time. Anybody have a problem with it?
Because the finance meeting goes so long?
It is so riveting.
Madam Chair,
They go through the damn.
So many
check,
people,
excuse
yeah.
me, they go through the check register, check by check by check by check.
We do not.
So,
yeah, Madam Chairman, before you close the meeting, I'd like to, as a point of clarity and courtesy to Mr. Valoran, the misinformation that he was relying on from LAFCO. What I believe they were relying on was voting for directors. That is registered voters. When it comes to, just want to send you home with a point of clarity, that's why I'm speaking up now. For voting for rate increases, the Constitution, like I said earlier, vests with parcel owners. Subsequent omnibus legislation and court decisions have expanded the parcel owner to also customers who are responsible for paying the bill. They have standing, parcel owners, customers, they have standing to vote on rate increases. it isn't vested in registered voters. That's not relevant. But registered voters do have the standing, and only them, to vote for directors.
On the partial owners, is it partial that inactive accounts, or is it all partial?
All parcels.
No,
Oh,
only with meters.
only with meters.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, thank you, Susan.
Yeah.
Whether they're active or not, all parcels with meters.
With meters,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, with meters.
Is it a simple majority?
With meters.
It's not a matter of voting for approval, it's a protest hearing.
And is it a
And if
simple
50%
majority?
of those that have standing to vote on the rate increases
50
oppose the rate increases, then the board is without legal authority to adopt the
50
rates.
plus 1.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, for a point of clarity and courtesy to you, sir, I love public comment, registered voters is not relevant to standing. It's parcel owners, tenants who are responsible for paying the bills, to wit, customers, and that's it.
And we
That
could
have meters,
actually
yeah.
approve rates that were less than the ones that were in the handout that went out, but not
Not more.
more.
Right.
Okay. With that, do I have a motion for adjournment?
Is that how I do, Jeff?
Move we adjourn?
Is that what?
The parcel
Favor?
owners are just the meters?
Aye. We're adjourned. Thank you.